Hi, this is Tim Ferriss, and welcome back to Masterpiece Theater. I'm kidding. We are going to talk about books, and specifically, I'm going to cover a few books that I found very enjoyable in the last few years, and also I'm going to talk about note-taking, how I digest books, how I synthesize different pieces of books so that it's not just in one eye and out the other, so to speak. Because consuming a ton of information, especially if it's just-in-case information instead of just-in-time information, is largely a waste of time. It's recreation, but it's not retention. Okay, so I'm going to talk about how I go through books, and I'm going to use a few fun examples. First one I'll talk about is Travels with Charlie, In Search of America, John Steinbeck. This is an incredible book. Beautifully written, simply written, and hilarious. I really did not expect this to be as funny as it was. It was recommended to me by my mom. My mom and my brother are both book snobs, so if they recommend anything, it's cleared a high hurdle. And you can see here on the inside, I make indices. I make an index in each book, and I do it in typically one of two ways, or I'll combine them. Here you will notice that I have written down page numbers with brief descriptions of what I found interesting. So I have in quotation marks, the ancient shudder. I liked that phrasing. So in many books I'll put PH next to it, and then I will write that down, which indicates the second way I can do an index. So this is page numbers, description. The other way I might do this in a book that's beautifully written is I will put, say, PH up somewhere, that means phrasing, and then underneath that I'll write down all of the various phrases that I found interesting, the wordsmithing that I found beautiful, or just the page numbers, and then they will be underlined on those respective pages. All right, so we have, just to give you a sample, right? We have the ancient shudder, that's a phrase. Guns and fishing as pretext, I'm guessing for conversation. Living fiercely, there are many, many, many quotes in here. And you will also notice there are a few that are starred. There are two here that are starred and one is circled. And within book notes, I'll very often do that for potential next actions or things that I could test. So if we take a look at 79, it says different church/denomination every Sunday. And I will flip to page 79, and it is a discussion of John's experience going to many different churches. And there's a lot of great writing in here, but I'll just jump to the part that caught my perspective. All right. But this Vermont God cared enough about me to go to a lot of trouble kicking the hell out of me. He put my sins in a new perspective. Whereas they had been small and mean and nasty and best forgotten, this minister gave them some size and bloom and dignity. I hadn't been thinking very well of myself for some years, but if my sins had this dimension, there was some pride left. I wasn't a naughty child, but a first-rate sinner, and I was going to catch it. And it goes on and on. And then later on the page, it says, all across the country, I went to a church on Sundays, a different denomination every week. And I thought this was worth pondering as an experiment, as a way to stretch my thinking, broaden perspectives, and become exposed to different subcultures and belief systems in the United States. That is 79. And I create this index without the circles and stars. Then a day later, a week later, I will go through and I will star, and then I'll go through a week later and circle. And in that way, I am able to identify which chapters, which techniques I have found most useful repeatedly, because upon first reading, first pass, I might find something incredibly striking that later proves to not be terribly useful. I can review books after I've done a few passes of the highlights. I can review what are most salient in terms of points and lessons and actions in a few minutes. Might be a 5 to 10 minute review of a book that took me 5 to 10 hours to read. I liberally will borrow from nonfiction to think about imaginary worlds and fantasy and fiction. I will also borrow liberally from fiction, say Dune, and try to copy and paste lessons learned about leadership, as an example, into so-called real life and the nonfiction realm. So I love reading, but more than just reading, I love reading with real behavioral change afterwards with real impact. So those are a few of the approaches that I use. They're not necessarily the best, but they work for me for not just reading, but taking structured notes to better structure your thinking, to make better decisions, and to have a greater impact on yourself, on those you care about, and on the world in general.